But we span a lot of the Eastern Seaboard.
Katsu is in Japan. Yeah. Vivi is in here too, and so is Ala. I'm so glad to see everybody.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us. Bonjour à tous. Oh, Miranda. Yay. So many former students. I'm going to be talking about everything you guys already know.
They're like, oh, this lady.
Yeah, the same thing.
I'll chime in. I'll go, listen, I've been listening to this lady since 2007. So you shut your mouth. She knows what she's talking about. And she keeps
coming back for more. That's masochism.
Take my money. Whatever Lou says is true. Yeah, absolutely. Also, yes, absolutely. No, yay. Joselito, I see you're just popped up too. You're like hidden by a browser window because I keep those links, keep them popping. So if the links are mentioned, I'm like ta 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 ta, and I'm ready. So like half of you is half of you are blocked by a browser, but I see like Janine and Vivian and then Joe and Nelson. Woo, that's it. That's all I get to see. Yay, welcome everybody. So if you could stick in the chat, like I already said that Nelson was in Rhode Island. So Nelson, you're not obligated to respond. But if you could put in the chat where you are, we are obviously coming to you from Georgia. My name is Meredith White. I live in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, Gwinnett County. And I teach Spanish 1 and 2 at the high school level. I've got wherever she is for you, she's here for me. I've got Lou. Yeah. Am I? Oh, Vivi, was that? Yeah. Deanna, is that? Okay. No, just dang it. I open these up like the Brady Bunch and I just always hope that I'm right, but okay. Well, am I close-ish? Did I hit? Yeah. Okay, maybe, whatever. I'll just circulate my arms. Gosh, it's too bad you can't, as a teacher, I've wished this, that you can't push your Zoom view to the students, like the same way, like Nelson was mentioning Go Formative. I would love to push the Go Formative assignment order to students. I don't want it to be by date necessarily, because it's going to screw, like, I want them to see what I see. So I want you to see my Zoom screen is what I want. I get selfish. Ugh, this experience has made us really bratty. I'm like, I want what I want and I make no apologies. Like I just, whatever. But anyways, yay. Yeah. Tell us what you teach like Vivi did. Like I said, I teach Spanish 1 and 2 and I'm in Gwinnett. So Lou is in Athens, Georgia. I am about 45 minutes west. So she's going to tell us obviously what she's up to these days, but we're super excited to have you here and talk about, using the target language and especially this year, quite the year, using it as much as possible, but also, the implications for the past and the future and kind of where we're going with all of this. And regardless of the language, just using as much target language as possible. Lou, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Woo.
So hi, everybody. I am Lou Tolosa Casadont. I teach at UGA, the University of Georgia.
Woo-hoo.
And a lot of you know me from here. And I teach, mainly my main job is to prepare teachers. So that's why Meredith knows me, because she was in one of the first cohorts I ever taught.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been around for a while. And I've worked with Ala was in my classes, and Vivi has worked with me, and Katsu has worked with me. Miranda so a lot of you know me from that program, and then I also teach other classes at the University of Georgia.
Well, and yeah, so which has all my money, University of Georgia 100%. Like Lou and I met you, Lou, fall of 2007. I think you were new to UGA and I was like leaving UGA. And so as an undergrad, so that last semester, that's crazy. Oh.
My first year here was as a graduate student in 2006.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man. Oh, okay.
No, that's crazy.
We look great.
Of course, nothing has changed.
Zoom we haven't changed. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, not at all. No, yeah, that was, and I remember like, so you look at things like target language use, and I remember, obviously, I literally still have that, like to the right here, da da da, in my little Wizard of Oz space. are my books, and I like I have the textbook still from those. So you look at your you know, you look at all your theory, you look at like all of the introduction books and all of the like how to teach language and all the things, and we talk a lot about target language. And I feel like 90-10 in 2007 would have meant 0 things. Like I'd have been like 90%, sure, that sounds like a number, whatever. And a lot of those things don't mean anything. Like you're focusing tonight on like the 6, like the ACTFL has the 6 core practices. We're focusing on target language tonight, but so much of the other 5, but also target language, is like so above you when you start teaching. You're like, okay, grammar as a concept, great. What does that even mean? Target language, okay, obviously, but where? Like how much, when, how do I do that? You know, so much of that. So I'm so thankful that we've had this evolution kind of together over the last 14 years and like a couple of additional degrees, because I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Which is crazy. I mean, I don't know. What have you seen change over the years, if anything?
Well, that's a great question. The funniest thing is we talk a lot about this 90%, 90-10. ACTFL is all the time telling us we need to speak 90% of the time in the target language and 10%, you know, in whatever majority language in the classroom. And it's really hard, like when people have done studies to find out exactly what goes on in the classroom, and then you interview the teachers, they're like, oh yeah, I use the language 90% of the time or 100% of the time. And then you actually show video footage of what's going on, and it's like, really, did you really use it, you know, 90% of the time or 100% of the time? Because it's so easy to fall back into this other language. And so so I always say that's our goal. And that has always been our goal, to get to 100% or 90%. Now, we also need to be aware of what the reality, right? And so in our experiences, because a lot of what guides us is our prior experiences. And so, you know, growing up, I started studying English when I was 8. And then, but I was, you know, just living. So I'm from Uruguay originally. And so being in Uruguay meant that I had access to Portuguese through TV. And so I learned Portuguese. I learned Portuguese from watching TV and listening to people. Right now, my Vivi can tell you my spoken Portuguese is very poor, but you know, it's like I'm no novice low in speaking, but my comprehension is really high because I understand what, you know, what people are saying. And so, you know, and so then I started thinking about how we learn the languages impact a lot the way we teach the language later on, you know. And so a very important experience that I had when I first came to the US was going to Concordia College and working at the Concordia Language Villages, right? And so the Concordia Language Villages is an immersion camp, which means that you walk in and you change your name. So you speak, you know, Meredith is now Maria or whatever, whoever you want to be, right? And you know, we used to exchange our money from dollars to pesetas back then. And yeah, and so, you know, so we ate foods that were from Spanish speaking countries. We played games, we sang songs, everything that we did was in the target language, right? And so from that and going to Concordia College, I received all of this, you must speak the target language 100% of the time. You need to immerse the students 100% of the time. And like you know, I was like, okay, that's my first language, right? Spanish, the language that I was hoping to teach, was my first language. And so I was like, I can do this. However, the one piece that I hadn't understood and I didn't have was the idea of the comprehensible input, right? And so I was like, I'll speak Spanish, no problem, you know. But then it was like, okay, how do I have to, and this is something that the comprehensible input was something that I learned before I actually met, Krashen and all of the
Right.
theories and the ideas behind Krashen's
Right.
ideas, right? And so in comprehensible input. And so I was like, okay, when I say entienden, okay, it's not as easy as when I say comprenden, right? And so like Nelson was saying, well, I learned to modify my speech so people can understand what I'm saying. And that's what I realized through teaching. I realized like, okay, if I use this thing called cognates, then I can stay in the target language a lot more than if I don't use cognates, right? Especially for the novice learners, which was my favorite thing to do. And so I was, I always felt, and you guys who went through this program, know that we push this idea of speak the target language 100% of the time or as much as possible. But then, it's like 5 years ago, we started a dual language immersion program, here in Athens. And so one of the things that we were striving for was to keep the languages separate. And so it was like, okay, 80% of the time, the idea was that the students in kindergarten, first grade, were going to do 80% of the time in Spanish and 20% of the time in English. And then as they went up, they would do 70-30 and then eventually 50-50. But the thing, what we found out really quickly was that maintaining that language division felt really artificial. Oh, wow. And so, because it was the same teacher switching back and forth. So, okay, now we're going to speak English. Ahora hablamos español. And it was like, it was the same person. And so it was like, in other programs, they do language separation because it's 50-50. They have two teachers. And so half the day you teach them in a language and then they come to me and I teach them in a different language and we swap kids. Right. And so we can maintain that language separation. But when it's the same instructor teaching in both languages, then there is no secret. The teacher speaks both languages. It's like, and so whatever
you understand me. No, I don't.
Right. So although I came from this very rigid, you speak only the target language, I realized that maybe not, right? Maybe not. And so then I started thinking about, because I was aware of that whole concept of like translanguaging, and how when we teach English as a second language, we say that it's beneficial to use translanguaging because it helps the students with comprehension. It helps the students grow in their second language. But in the idea is that you see the student as a whole. Is not this, your whatever your native language is separate from your language, the language that you're trying to learn now. And so we're seeing the student as a whole. We're seeing the student as somebody who comes with a wealth of knowledge about just language learning and language in general. And so we can capitalize on that, right, in order to support them in their language learning journey. And so I started thinking, okay, if we do that in ESL, how can we do this in world language classes? How can we use the whole repertoire, like Ofelia Garcia calls it, right? How can we use the whole linguistic knowledge that the students bring with them in order to, in order to help them learn whatever else we're trying to teach them, right?
Right. Well, and like Kelly Ferguson said in the chat, like literally exactly what we just said. Like she said, I'm so used to controlling my language, and I'm the same because I've only ever taught novices on purpose. That's what I'm super passionate about, is like, I think novices deserve to have a great teacher. And so many times we go, I did my time. I'm teaching the upper levels now because that's perceived as easier or whatever. I don't care. Like I'm not here for that. I want level 1 and 2 because I want, I want to be comprehensible. I want to have fun and negotiate meeting. Yeah. And she had mentioned like, which I totally relate to. I'm so used to controlling my language for comprehensibility in class that then you feel stilted. Like when you're talking on your own, you're like, oh, I guess, oh, hola, hola, you know, and you just like talk to that person. Like, I guess I'm just on my own now. Like you find yourself, it's like a weird self-editing almost, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I totally understand. And it changes the way you use the language, you know, in when you're talking to other people. And so I mean, I notice it, you know, like when I speak with other Spanish speakers, it's like there are certain words that I will use more often than others just because I just got used to saying that word because the students were going to understand what I was saying, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Nelson was saying, like it's just easier to be like, pues voy a parquear el carro, you know, instead of like estacionar or like having to think. I was wondering the other day about the word actuar, because I had always heard, like if you're acting, like I was thinking in my, I think fingir, I'm not sure, but I was always thinking like pretending or acting like something was not actuar. And then my colleague was like, actua is fine. And I was like, okay, that seems too cognate-y. Like that seems too easy. But she was like, oh, whatever, you know, because, you know, bilingual, like it's whatever. And so many of our students are bilingual that, yeah, it starts to, I don't know, it starts to affect, yeah, like your mid-sentence going like, let me find a cognate. I want to make sure that everybody understands. And it's like, okay, well, that's weird. Florencia mentioned too, like that she was told earlier in her career not to speak to students with her Argentinian accent because she's from Argentina, and to keep it neutral, whatever the heck that means, which is not a thing. So I still struggle to speak like I normally would when I'm in class or speak with my students, and even using tu. Oh, yeah, no, it's absolutely like, it's like pressure, like social pressure to linguistically, I don't know, do whatever.
And that's so, I mean, it's two things. One thing is I love teaching first level also, because it's very selfish. I love it because I see the growth. Like they come with nothing, they come scared, they come whatever with all these preconceived notions. And then at the end, they're saying things and you're like, yes, you see?
I'm the best.
Yeah, beginner levels are fun and wonderful to teach. But yeah, and what Florencia was saying is so true, because I feel like so my first teaching experience was at the college level, and this was self-imposed totally, because I was like, okay, the students are going to come to me with knowledge of the language. And there are few Uruguayans around, right? And you know, they're and this was in Minnesota, right? And so it's like,
you're the only Uruguayan I've ever met.
How many Argentinians, how many Uruguayans do they have that would use the sounds that I use in my Spanish repertoire, right? And so then I was like, okay, then I am going to make all my sh sounds, you know, for double L's and Y's, right. I'm going to make them E sound. So for as long as I taught at the college level, I was saying, yo me llamo en la lluvia. And, you know, and I was like, and I got used to that, right? I got totally used to that. But then I was like, okay, my goal was to do what I'm doing right now, like prepare language teachers. And so I was like, okay, if I want to do that, I have to have middle school and high school experience at least, right? So I went in, so at the language villages, I would speak Uruguayan Spanish and I didn't care. So I worked with all levels of kids. I taught at a Montessori school, elementary school, all levels. I would speak Uruguayan Spanish, no problem. But the college level, I wanted, you know, because I was like, okay, they come with something and I'm going to mess up their sounds and they're going to have a hard time, which is not true. But, you know, it was
like, yeah, absolutely a worry. Like, oh, I don't want to.
I didn't want to mess him up. But then when I went back to teaching middle school and high school, I was like, okay, I'm your first teacher for this language. I am going to use my Spanish, and you'll get used to it, and you whatever, you know. And so then they would go to the other levels, and they knew who their teacher had been, because they would say, "Yo me llamo," and I was like, yes. But I loved hearing them. You know, it was like it felt so much closer to me than "Yo me llamo," because you know. And so I yeah, it's very interesting how we, you know, even when nobody tells us, because Florencia was told, but I wasn't, and I still made myself do it,
Right.
because
Right.
I felt like it was a disservice to students if I wasn't doing that, right?
Right. I remember learning from, because I learned from my high school was really unusual. It was 50% 50% non-Hispanic, and then 50% Hispanic, typically first generation Mexican American. And so I had lots of opportunities to practice my Spanish. And I remember an audio saying, "Yo me llamo," and like we were doing like questions with it. And later we had a substitute that day, and our teacher came back the next day, and we were like, "Senora, like, who's Joe?" Because we had like never heard anything but anybody from like Mexico talk. And she was like, "Okay, well, we need to talk about different accents," because we were like, "I think we got all the questions right," but and I was like nerd front row, like, "We're glad you're back. Couple of things on behalf of the class, you know, like we're confused about 7 through 10 because who is Joe?" And she was like, "Okay, there is no Joe." Like, who's Joe? And but it was like a recording from the book that was like, "Yo me llamo," you know. We were like, I have not noted a Joe in this scenario. And and a bunch of overachiever students like, "Well, I'm upset," and like we've made like but that's exactly it. Like when you're only exposed to so many accents, or like you said, you feel like, oh, maybe this is like too fringy, like too far. When will they ever, whatever, whether you're specifically told or not. But I don't know. Do you find it easier to focus on the 90 or the 10? Like if you think 90-10 and you think, okay, the goal, not the standard, not the mandate, but the goal is 90% target language, like as close as you can get. Is it easier for you when you're thinking about all of the things that you just said, like maybe adjusting, maybe whatever, or not, just going whatever, puro Uruguay, like whatever it is? Do you find it easier to focus on the 90 or the 10?
I think I think I would just speak Spanish to the kids all the time. And so I would not think about the 10 almost at all.
Okay.
And so I would just speak the language. And so how would I make it understandable for the students? How would I make it comprehensible? And so in addition to using cognates, I would use, like Ala mentioned, my body language. I would point at things. I would use images. I would use what they call Mother S, which is like slowing down your language a little bit, pronunciating or enunciating really well. Through the use of all of these external sources, I would make sure that and I would always contextualize things. And so the students would know through the context, through what it is that we're talking about, and so there are homonyms, but if I'm using it within a context, you won't understand it to mean something else, right? So I felt like I was very successful in speaking the target language with the students a lot of the time. But I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking to somebody who was talking specifically about this 10%. And she said, one thing that I do with the 10%, because I do want to do the 10%, is I talk about management things like homework stuff, or like, little things that that are kind of superficial or external to what it is that we're trying to do in the classroom. But then, I've also read people who say, when you do that, you are giving the student's language the power again, right? And so it's like there is a conflict. Oh, I switched to English because everybody will understand. And so we will be able to resolve this faster. Or when there is a question, I switch to English because then it's going to be easier, you know. And
Right.
it's like, well, so what's the purpose of the language that you're teaching if you cannot do those key things in that target language, right? So
Right.
all the work we do, you know, it's work that, I mean, the bottom line, I think, is getting to know our students, getting to know their needs, you know, getting to know, in addition to what it is that we're expected to teach, is like, who are my kids? Because depending on who they are, I can use the language one way or another. I can use certain words, you know, instead of another. And like the whole idea of parquear and, you know, el parqueadero and whatever, it's like, okay, so if you say that, that's great. And there's another word for that, which is el estacionamiento, you know, and so what we do is we don't tell them that their language is incorrect, but we just give them other options. So then when they, because when I studied English, my English was British English, right? So I came to the US saying things that nobody used, like the boot and the bonnet of the car, you know, and it was like, what's that? Or my trousers, or, you know, I live in a flat or whatever. And it was like, what's that?
Amazing. I can just see my trousers are, excuse me, what?
I mean, one time I ordered a biscuit, you know, and they brought me a Southern biscuit, like a biscuit with gravy. And I was like, I want a chocolate chip biscuit.
Right.
You know, and so what I do when I teach language is like, okay, so these things that we put in our ears, you know, this is what people from here and there and there. So I give them a variety of words and I say, you know what, learn the one that is easiest for you, that makes most sense to you. Because anywhere you go, they're going to tell you you're wrong anyway, because you're going to be using a word that is not the word that they're using. I mean, there's so many, the variety is so huge. And so instead of saying, this is the word and that's the only word you can use, it's not fair. Now, if you go to Uruguay and you say el parqueadeo, maybe people will not understand. So it's good to have options, right? When you're using the language, is good to have a variety of opportunities and possibilities. So if you don't get this, well, how about this? Now, at the same time, I also teach students important chunks of language, like no entiendo, más despacio, por favor, and all of those things, like I'm not getting what you're saying, or can you slow down? Because these are important tools that they need to have in order to negotiate the conversation, the interaction. And so they have some power over the conversation that's taking place, because you're like, okay, I'm not getting this, right?
Right. Well, and like you said, like it's options. Like I think the key word there is options. I always tell my students, I'm like, it's like a buffet. You know, vocabulary is like a buffet. You don't eat everything at the buffet, hopefully. You know, like that's why it's a buffet. You kind of take, if I know that I teach calcetines, you teach medias or leggings. Like we go on Corte Ingles's website and they say los leggings, whatever, but somebody else says whatever word, you know, it's like options. And I think that the key there is not putting anything at, like not categorizing as right, wrong, better, worse, like that kind of a thing, because it's like, no, I mean, some people it's like the value attached and the standard versus non-standard. Florencia tweeted recently, which today, Florencia, you should have seen me. I was like, I remembered, and I had seen, I don't know what the tweet, maybe it was more recent than I recall, but it was like at the top of my feed, and she mentioned how in the actual proficiency, whatever, like I can't think of the word, levels, it mentions that, you know, for novice high, for example, a native speaker can maybe understand me, but understands that I'm learning. And so I just put up my like proficiency wall, kind of revamped yesterday. And so then today, for whatever reason, that tweet was at the top of my feed and I had the white out and I was like, you know, and I was taking out native because, you know, the issue is with like, yeah, what are we calling standard, non-standard? If someone says parquear and that's all they've ever known and they grew up in a bilingual home, who am I to go, it's estacionar, you know, like, excuse you. So I crossed out native and I just put Spanish. So now they all say a Spanish speaker, like of whatever can, you know, a sympathetic locutor of whatever level can understand that I'm learning and so on, which is a little bit easier in the lower levels because it's pretty clear cut, but it really made me think. And she also mentioned in the chat that we need to be careful about pointing out accents, you know, students understanding how accents are tied to identity and the journeys as speakers of other languages. Like not everyone feels comfortable about talking about their accent. And that's a privileged point that I don't experience, but that you might, and, you know, others do, obviously, which I think is interesting.
And the whole idea of native speaker, you know, and that dichotomy, the native speaker and the non-native speaker. And the thing is, I've spoken, like, I am a native speaker of Spanish, and I've spoken with other native speakers of Spanish, and I don't understand them, you know, and so it's okay. I mean, it's like saying I speak English as my first language, and I go to Scotland and I have trouble. It's okay. It's like, you know, it's like just pay attention. Just, you know, one thing that helps me is listen for the certain sounds, and once I understand the sounds, then it's like, oh, okay, now my brain can put together what you're saying and I can follow, you know. But I think there is this feeling like, oh, English is my second language, so, you know, I don't feel good enough about, you know, certain things, or Spanish is not my first language, I don't feel good enough about whatever. And there's a lot of we want native speakers to teach these languages, and I think many times non-native speakers, you know, people who learned this language as a second, third, or other language, do a better job because they know they can empathize, they can sympathize, they can understand the struggles, and they can understand the journey differently than somebody who was born and grew up with this language, right? Nelson had asked about Vosotros. I think we need to teach Vosotros. I do not agree when I go to classes and I observe and it's like, nosotros, ellos. And I'm like, what happened to Vosotros? You know, it's like, guys, what happened? Because ustedes is one way, but not all of us say ustedes. It is not because, oh, if you go to Spain, you can use vosotros and show off. No, it's so when you go to Spain, you can understand what's going on, you know, because when you say, you know, whatever, like, fuistes, you know, fuiste, vistes, you know, when we use that, it's like, I don't know what that is. You know, who's Joe is the same thing. It's like, these days, you know,
who is Joe and what is he doing? Like,
and so I feel like it's another way of giving that variety. It's another way of showing that we are diverse, and it's okay. It's something that we need to celebrate, not something that we need to hide. And so I think it's important for us to, you know, when we talk about in Spanish, it seems like we do a good job at bringing in a variety of identities. We try to bring in minoritized people in our countries. A lot of us do, at least in the classroom. It seems like some, you know, when we teach other languages, it's like it's very much our peninsular or our, you know, whatever the language originated, and we don't think as much about the diaspora, right? And so I always ask, you know, my students as they go through the program to think beyond, you know, think beyond Spain, or think beyond France, or think beyond Portugal, you know, because it's like there are a lot of other countries where that language is spoken. And even think, like, for us in Spanish, think about the US, because like Nelson was saying, you know, our US Spanishes, you know, are clearly related closer to English than to, you know, Peninsular Spanish.
Right, right.
And so yeah.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, it's like, how do you, you know, like vos, and then so teaching vos, teaching vosotros, also reconciling, like Nelson mentioned, and Angelica as well, like also reconciling what might seem like new uses of Spanish, like Latinx, but they aren't new. They might just have been in places not, you know, exposed to certain people, all those kind of things. Like, we tend to have these groups of words, like real words, new words, old words, not real words, and that all absolutely affects the target language use that we value and that we give, I don't know, that we pay attention to. And like Stacy said, like selling students short, if we're not giving them as many possibilities as possible, as many options to say socks and pants and shorts, which is just short pants, you know, or whatever, are we selling them short by saying, no, it's calcetines and nothing else, or it's, you know, whatever, la fromage and nothing else? Like, okay, maybe, but like maybe not. Or even tying connections with some of our students, where my students who speak Arabic will go pantalon, like pantalon, camisa, like camis. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, like get ready, I have more. And allowing them to make those connections and, you know, kind of see, like just giving them more and more and more. Why not? You know, because you and I are going to have, as English speakers, like you said, in London or in Scotland, we're going to have those misunderstandings where we go, hi, excuse me, where's the bathroom? You know, like, okay, the loo, the water closet. And we're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, whatever needs to happen here. Yeah, like whatever you need to do, whatever you need to understand. Yes, great. That, you know, it's all a lot to consider and to reflect on. And sometimes when we're given like a curriculum and it's like, okay, go, 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 you better hit all of the present tense, massive eye roll, before, you know, this amount of time. Even though ACTFL says we must maximize the exposure and provide a language-rich environment that prepares them for success in the real world, sometimes our curriculum doesn't mirror a real world. I don't know. How do we approach that? How do we begin to consider all of the things at one time?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I mean, it's hard to, one thing that I think about is, you know, how can we bring multimedia to the classroom in order to create that language rich environment, right? That prepares the students for success. And so, but then when we do multimedia, you know, we are exposing them many times to what has been called you know, authentic materials. Right. And so to some, you know, and this is something, it's a term that some people disagree on the meaning, right? So originally, I think the meaning was something created by native speakers of the language for native speakers of the language, right? So this is an authentic material. But then I have also seen people say, well, can I, for my novice learners, count authentic materials, stuff that other kids in the classroom created because it's at their level and they're creating for an audience. And so are these authentic too? Because there is an audience, there is a message that is being sent. And so can that count as authentic as well, right? And so when we use multimedia, though, I feel like we are bringing that language-rich environment, especially when we're teaching online. If we have songs and if we have visuals and if we have a variety of things that represent, you know, a variety of these places where the language is spoken, then we're exposing the students to a variety. And when we think about language-rich environment, a lot of people think text, like heavy books or whatever, but it's like anything is a tweet, is a saying, is an infographic, is anything that is, you know, something said, something spoken, a vlog, it's a variety of things. So I think we need to stop being rigid about what, you know, what the term is. It's like, it's a variety of things. It's whatever, it's a graffiti, is social media posts, is anything that I can bring to the classroom that will enrich that environment, and they will make the language come alive, right? Because if as learners of a new language, we understand the cultures, right, that speak the language that we're learning, then we're going to have fewer issues when we're engaging with the people, because we will understand those practices. We will understand those perspectives, right? And so we'll be like, oh, okay, so I get it. I get you, because I understand that background part, that if I'm just learning the language, you know, and the structure, this and this and this, and I cannot go outside of that, I might not get, right?
Right. Well, and like you said, knowing your audience, knowing who you're talking to is a lot of, I guess, what we do anyway. But it's so interesting when we're trying to stay in Spanish, especially in a novice level class, like stay in Spanish. And then like for me as a non-native speaker, who's Spanish? Because I'm going like, okay, I've got, you know, this word and this word, but I'm like, you know, it's like, you know, some of it, like as non-native speakers, if we've learned all over the world, we're like a mutt, you know, we have no, and then you've got parents who go, what kind of Spanish are they learning? And you're like, well, hell if I know. Like, I don't know. I'm going to say platicar. I'm going to say judías verdes. I'm going to say chancla. Like, I don't know. You know, and we've had multiple words in the chat for avocado, which is like new words to me. I'm like, I was saying aguacate. Where can I go?
That's fair.
Avocado. Like, I'm gonna do it wrong now. So I think a lot of it too, like for me as a personal reflection, within the 6 core practices, within the standards, because I feel like we also have all these actful like spheres of things that hang out and like look at each other, but they're different. So we have like the standards, the can-do statements, the proficiency benchmarks, and the 6 core practices, and they're all like, ooh, you know, just kind of hanging out like in each other's space. When we look at that, I think we also have to reflect on who we learned from, who we're still speaking with and interacting with, and like what kind of target language use we're getting as teachers on a daily basis. Because if I go, hey, Kelly, you know, you really need to, like, your target language use is awesome. You really need to help Allah with his language use because he's not using enough and like his students are never hearing it. Like they might have totally different, here's where they are on my screen. Like they might have totally different study abroad experiences, like proficiency levels. Kelly might be killing it in like distinguished, superior. I mean, obviamente. Thank you. Gracias. Es obvio. And then Allah's like, I'm doing the best I can in advanced. Sorry, Allah. And like all those kind of things, like they might differ from each other. So collegially, are they comfortable using target language? My department uses target language with each other almost 100% of the time. Like if I pop across the hallway and go, Lu, ¿qué haces para el almuerzo? ¿Ya llevaste algo de casa? Okay, well, no, yo iba a ir, pero no voy, like, porque no vas, you know, whatever. Like we're constantly negotiating meaning. And it also gives us insight into each other's proficiency level or lack thereof. And all of the vocabulary, like even vertical alignment. I had no idea why my colleagues were having issues from 2 to 3 until I realized literally the example you gave. They were going, entienden, entienden, and kids were like, I don't know what you're saying. And I was like, oh, we used comprenden for 2 years because we felt like it was easier. And we actually put them at a disadvantage. Like, oops, sorry, kids, entienden from now on. And so things like that, I don't know if where you think of like implementation, sustainability, where like target language use stands in terms of difficulty. I find it one of the hardest core practices to implement and sustain. But I don't know if you agree. I think grammar as a concept is also kind of a hard one. The rest you go, yeah, okay, obviously. But grammar as a concept and target language use, I find to be the hardest.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about the six core practices is that to me, they're nicely intertwined, you know, they're
Yes.
connected very nicely. So I think the first thing, you know, before we do anything is to think about our goals
Yeah.
and where do you want your students to be at the end of the course or the unit or even a lesson, right?
Right.
And then you think about how the learners will show you that they have met those goals, and then you know, the goals that you have for them, and then finally you will create prepare the activities that they're going to be using, right? So starting with that big picture, I think, is helpful to, you know, to go into the daily practices and make the experience more meaningful or more congruent for the students, right? And so then you have to maximize the time that you have with the students, which is the other part, right? And so whether you're doing this virtually or in person or in a combination like you were doing, you know, you've done this year, in which you had students in the classroom and outside, right? You have to think about how to connect all of those. And so one way of maximizing the time with the students is, you know, to use, so you think, if you're thinking about following the core practices, okay, you use the language 90% of the time. And you do that by bringing in authentic resources, right? So that is another core practice. And then you create opportunities for the learners to use that language in context and meaningful ways when they're talking to each other. And while they're doing this, you're providing the feedback. So I think all of this is kind of together. So if to me, it's like, if I know where we're going, I can kind of say, okay, I'm going to strive to speak as much as I can, or to provide as much input, because providing input doesn't mean you have to speak to them the whole time either, right?
Right.
And so they could be listening to something, they could be viewing something, they could be talking to each other, they could have a guest speaker. I mean, there are so many things that could happen that could provide that input, right? And so you strive for that 90%, and then you bring in the other core practices that we have, you know? And so if we I use the words meaningful and contextualized, you know, strategically, because I think using those languages means that you want to get to know the students, you know, in order to make it meaningful to them. And so it's like, what are they interested in? So I have to teach about restaurants, right? I have to teach about food, like you were talking to Nelson as we started. Okay, so if I have to talk about food, what is it about food that they care about? You know, should we talk about, you know, recipes? Do they like cooking? Or should we talk about menus? Do they like going to restaurants? Or should we do a combination of things? Should we send them out to explore by themselves and, you know, create something for us and share with each other, you know? And so I think always going back to that idea of knowing the students that you work with, right?
Right. Well, and like you said, like, providing input doesn't mean we need to be speaking to them all the time. You know, it can be listening, it can be reading.
Right.
Yep, right. Like literally anything. And that was today, Thursday. So I don't know if it was Tuesday, but it might have been last week. That was said in terms of just like any interpretive, like, okay, any interpretive is like, that's target language. And I thought, man, that's comforting, because at least my students right now who are reading, listening, you know, we might not be interacting live, you know, whatever, but like, absolutely, I was comforted in feeling like, okay, good, they're still getting input. I haven't lost my mind, you know, because I was feeling good about that. But yeah, it feels like a lot of pressure. I think when people start thinking about 90-10, or at least I did, you know, when we met, I was like, what? Like backwards design? That sounds super complicated, and I don't know what that means, and I don't know what any of these words mean. And a lot of it's just like pum pum pum, you know, past you. But then when you get time to settle in, you go, okay, 90-10, like I can shoot for that. For me, it was easier to focus on the 10, and like you said, clarifying meaning, just like instructions, directions, classroom logistics. Yes, of course you can go to the restroom, go ahead a lot. Joe, you can go to, whatever, things like that. But being really choosy about the 10. And then at Skolt, I want to say 2017, 2018. I don't remember. Marty Abbott was there. She was still executive director. Maybe it was, I didn't Flag and Skolt because it was in Atlanta. Okay. So it was the combo. And I remember Marty Abbott as the executive director of Skolt giving a session that said, 90-10, there wasn't any science. We just like made up the numbers. And we were all like, like I almost fainted because I was like, Marty, I have what? Like you changed my life, but really like she relieved the pressure of the 90-10, like whatever thing of like what words, how often. It's so much pressure on the teacher, it's not, I never even thought about it being reading. I literally just thought about teacher talking the whole time and students talking. And so that was really a relief to think about other sources of input and her to go, there was no science. We just kind of like thought it'd be a good number, and there it was. So I thought that was really, again, like target language use is necessary for one's proficiency, but not, I mean, there are varying levels of sufficient for different people. Some people might need clarification of meaning that might help them where you go, no, Lou, you're doing great. It's a kid in Spanish 1. You're like, Lou, you're doing fine. Look for the cognates first, right? Like, it's fine. Like, you're doing great. Awesome. Keep it up. Even if your goals with different students vary, at least you're getting them, they feel like they've heard the language, they've used the language. I don't know a lot of times how much more we can do.
Well, and I think, the input is like, there are two types of input, really. It's like, I can speak all day to my students and they get a lot of input and they have no clue what I'm saying, right? I mean, I can just spit words out and I speak the language. Yeah, okay, 90 minutes. Okay, bye. See ya. I hope you like the class. And it's like, and they don't leave with anything, right? So if we don't produce language that they are comprehending and scaffold it in a way, so like, okay, so we bring in these authentic materials. Well, I might look at the authentic material and have no clue what I'm dealing with. But if I get help, if somebody scaffolds this for me, or if somebody guides me a little, okay, so we're going to read this. It's a little like an I+1 is a little above your level, right? But you can do it if you do these things. Like, let's look at headings. Let's look at subheadings. Let's look at the first and the last paragraph. Let's look at images or graphs or anything that is part of this text that I'm giving you, right? And so giving them the tools and helping them learn, because a lot of the time also is about the tools that we're teaching them that will help them become more independent learners and self-sufficient rather than having to lean on the teacher the whole time also.
Right, absolutely. Well, and like self-sufficient is the key there. Like self-sufficient, you don't need me. You don't need me to scaffold it necessarily. You don't need me to like baby it down. Because if I'm a native speaker, or if I'm, I wouldn't have had the strategies to do that, like starting out, then it's like, no, I said what I said. Like, what do you want me to do with that language? That kind of thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. That absolutely.
I was just thinking, but even when you do grow up speaking a certain language, people do give you all that scaffolding. Wow. Like, if like as a little kid, you're like, somebody says something and you're like, they point at it. It's like, you milk, and you're like, milk. Okay, I just got, and that's the other thing is like teaching them, listen for keywords, listen to the words that you can hang on to, and then let your brain put the rest of the thing together, right? And so a lot of it is like, okay, am I understanding some keywords, right? And then can I, because of the context again, can I figure out what's happening, right?
Right. And like Kelly just said in the chat, ocho, where the kids are like, I heard ocho. I'm like, right, eight something. Like, also not what we're doing, you know, but like, you know, and the role that this plays in output, Vivi just mentioned, and literally that was my next question, was when we look at organizing strategies for input, like we go, okay, I want to do these types of activities for listening. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat. That's one of my favorite links for lesson planning from Keith Toda, who's here in Gwinnett. And he's a Latin teacher. His school makes me sick. Like they have 6, I think maybe 7 Latin teachers. Ugh. Anyway, killer program. They're incredible, but like, whatever. They're amazing. And I'm always just like, oh, come on. Like, could you guys be more awesome? No, the answer is no. They could not be more awesome. So he has actually compiled a blog post of his that goes like different strategies to stay comprehensible, like with reading, but they actually go way beyond reading. And a lot of them involve speaking and involve all the different modes. So I'm going to drop that link. But, you know, when we think about target language use, when we think about kind of getting organized in terms of reading, listening, speaking, like how we're kind of organizing the target language use in our classrooms, what about output? Like where does output have a place?
Super important, I think. I feel like, you know, there are, well, I feel like it's very important to allow students, and Swain, for example, talks about this a lot in terms of you get all of this input and it's great and it's comprehensible and you get everything that is happening, right? But then what do you do to get it out, or how do you know where your holes are, right? And that's where the output comes, because if you're not using the language, it's all in it's like with my Portuguese, right? That I was saying, it's like, I understand everything. And then when it's my turn to say something, you know, it's like, and it's and so it becomes really hard for me.
Try on hold.
Oh, that was my computer weird all of a sudden.
Oh, I was like, somebody's saying something and I'm not. It was speaking Portuguese to me. But it's like, you know, until you produce that output, you don't know exactly what you know and what you don't know. And so I think that the output is very important. And so in the output, you know, can be very scaffolded at the very beginning, you know, for our novice students. We always think about, for example, in writing, we say, okay, write about blah, 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 because the students, especially at the high school level or middle school even, they are proficient in writing and they know how to write in their native language, right? And so then we say, well, write a paragraph introducing yourself and describing yourself. And it's like, it's like, I don't know if I can do this, right? Because it's too much too soon. And so it's like, okay, let's think back about how we learned to write. And it was like, there was a lot of scaffolding. There was a lot of, okay, I'm going to give you the beginning of the sentence, or I'm going to give you very specific guidelines on what are the things that you're going to say. We're going to do a brainstorming activity in which we think through the activity. We do, I do, you do, we do, or, you know, we do, I do, you, we do, I do, we do, you do, right? And so that gradual release, right? It's like, let me model, then let's do another one together. And now you guys do it. And when I say you do, that doesn't mean that you do individually. Do not look at your partner. You know, it's like this whole thing of cheating in foreign languages is so hard for me, because it's like, help each other, you know, help each other. Like when you are traveling and you are brave enough to use the language of the country that you're going to, and it's not your language, and you're struggling, if you have that sympathetic listener, they're going to give you words. They're going to cheat for you, right? But it's like, it's just part of the communication. And so we can lean on each other and learn from each other, right? And how many times are we speaking our native language and we're like, oh, what's the word? You know, what's the word I'm trying to use? And it's not coming to me. It's not coming to me in any language that I speak, right? And it's like, that's just normal brain not working right now, you know, and it's like, it's okay. And so I feel like when we do that gradual release of responsibility, when we're speaking or when we're writing something, it's okay to consult. It's okay to ask each other, you know, and then again, having, right, like Nelson is saying, ¿cómo se dice? Having those tools, ¿qué significa? ¿Cómo se dice? And so, so we're helping the students also negotiate meaning and help each other, right, using the target language. And so we are creating an environment in which the students feel comfortable making mistakes, because that's the other thing that I think we fail to tell the students. It's like, one, it's okay to make mistakes. Two, feel free to laugh at yourself, because that's all language. You know, that's why I feel like language teachers and language people are so cool, because it's like you learn to laugh at yourself. You're not so uptight. It's like, okay, I made another mistake. I mispronounced this word and I said a bad word instead, you know, and it's like, that's just, you know, that's just the way it happens, you know. What can you do?
As someone named Meredith, who, when I went to Spain, every person I introduced myself thought I was saying, me llamo mierda. And they were like, like my house mom, thank you, Janine. That's the appropriate reaction. And Nelson too. Kelly, say to you as well. They were, my house mom went, Ave Maria, Papa Dios. I was like, I mean, I'm Catholic, but she's like extra Catholic, and that's a lot. Like, yeah. So it was funny that you said Maria earlier, because I was Maria for the rest of my stay. They were like, mierda, absolutely not. Like, they were not here for Meredith. And I understood. Because it's like in the moment, it's so vulnerable. I think we forget when we look at 90% target language, good grief. Like, so imagine, again, I mentioned my colleagues because I like work on the dream team, and I'm like, oh, like waiting for the other shoe to drop because they're incredible. And I'm like, I've done something wrong to like get in this amazing place because they're amazing. Like, what if your colleagues said, nope, you've reached your 10% English quota, like we're going to cut you off, like you have to use 90%, or with your administrator or with your whatever. Like, if you're not acknowledging the vulnerability, the different uses of terminology, the different subjects, all the different accents, like all of the different language, I don't want to say worth, but if you're putting more worth on like a certain kind of language or language from a certain place, and the value, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Like, if you're valuing language unequally and kind of holding students to this standard that you yourself wouldn't hold, especially if you feel self-conscious about your own target language use with colleagues or with significant others or with friends, I think that's a lot to reflect on. Like, I think that's, to me, some of the key reflection points of what are we actually, like, what are our units doing? What are our objectives and our can-do statements? Like, what the hell do they need to be able to, like, I can prepare a recipe. Like, I'm not cooking in Spanish ever. You're like, what am I, you know, like, I'm not. So, and that's literally the unit we're in. So I say that to like poke fun at myself, because I'm like, pon, añade, or nea, you know, like I'm learning these as well, because I'm like, this is the word. But what is the applicability of like what we're doing? And can we stand behind why we're staying in the target language? I guess I think is a lot of I feel like what you're saying comes down to is like, why, what for, and to whom? Like, to whom are we speaking? What's the function? I don't know. What, you know, where do we go from there?
Well, I feel like, you know, intercultural competency, becoming more sensitive towards others and just more open and more understanding. Yeah. You know, especially nowadays that things are just so complicated, and it's just so hard to connect with people, or there has been like a door that has been opened that it's okay to be a jerk, you know, and it's like, you know, and so I think that if nothing else, our job as language teachers is to open their minds to, there are other people out there and they're really cool. They are different, they do things differently, but it's not wrong necessarily, you know. And so thinking about those 5 C's, you know, making connections and making comparisons, not to the person that we're talking about, but to, okay, what do we have in common? What are some things that we do differently? Why do we do things differently? And maybe learn to like what the other, oh, I like that way of thinking. That makes so much sense to me. And maybe not so much what my family or my culture does, you know? And so to me, you know, when we're teaching languages, especially the way we teach languages in the US, that a lot of students, especially in Georgia, I'm going to speak about Georgia because that's the context I'm most familiar with. But in Georgia, a lot of our students take classes just to get the requisites, you know, in order to apply for college. And so, do I have those two levels of the language, so then I can apply and go to a 4-year college? Right. And so, you know, in those 2 years, we might not be able to teach a lot of language necessarily, but we might be able to teach a lot of understanding of others. And to me, that is just so important. And hopefully also is the hook that they need to want to go further with the language and the culture, because now they just fell in love with this language, you know, through, like, one of the things that my students came back with this semester as they were doing student teaching was that idea of March Madness. And, yes. You know, and so everybody was doing it, right? And exposing the students to all of these different songs. And there's so much you can do with music and with songs, right? And so I was like, if nothing else, all of those dances, all of those songs, all of those artists will make the students think that, oh, this is so cool. I want to keep learning about this. I want to keep engaging with this, whatever it is, right? That got them. And so I think that if nothing else, if we get them to fall in love with the language, the culture, everything, or if they become more understanding, that is just so important.
Right. Well, and exactly like you said love. And it makes me think of Stacey Margarita Johnson out of Tennessee, who's also at the university level. Mm-hmm. And she said, you know, sometimes at the end of the day, earlier in our webinar series, at the end of the day, I think learning another language and acquiring another language or additional languages just helps us love better. And I was like, oh man, like that's super deep, you know, it just helps us like love the world better and differently. And I was like, oh, I'm fine. You know, it was like a really emotional conversation, but I think, man, I think that's exactly it. Like we can love ourselves in different ways. We can love others, I think, better and in different ways, and learn about both, I think, in kind of, you know, in the process. And like Allah mentioned, like cultures with like language, I mean, that's, you know, we lead with culture, we lead with emotion, language will follow. Like whatever it is that we are leading with, we don't lead with some stupid language chart, you know, like soy eres es, somos soy son. Like you have to learn that before you can negotiate any kind of meaning. No, like let's see that in context. Let's see that in whatever, all kinds of different scenarios and meanings. And then let's play around with that. You know, let's sexy that up a little bit. And now you use it and I'll use it. And I think, I don't know. I just think that's really important. And this year, especially, like we've now been like a year, 15, math is hard, 14 months into kind of this digital experience where here we are, like we've got more formative data than we've ever had before. I've never given students this much feedback on their target language use on mine. I've never calculated so carefully mine because I've got the Zoomies and the Roomies. So I've got kids with me, awkward, kids on Zoom, less awkward, but like still a degree of awkward, and you know, whatever. So you're like, I can literally tell you how many minutes of Spanish they've heard, read, you know, that kind of thing, all interpretively. And it's like a whole different weird experience to where to reflecting on like what I value, what we're grading, like all of that, just all of it's a lot. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on kind of where we're going from here in terms of target language, especially as we look at next year. For us in Gwinnett County, it's going to be back to normal, but also with some of the electronic components. I mean, I can't imagine that students won't have a device, a piece. So when we can just say, okay, go ahead and click on this listen to this audio track from Spain this morning. You know, if I wake up at 4 and go, okay, quick, let me look and let me find something. I'm going to hope they mention, or if we do like noticias diarias or something, you know, like quick, let me boop. It's like 3 clicks and I can attach it to today's classwork and that's it. Like, I don't know where you seeing, as we finish up, where do you see us going from here?
Well, a variety of things came to mind as you were asking the question, but so technology, I think the affordances of technology, we can negate, right? And so we are going to, I believe, as educators at all levels, we are going to lean on technology just because it has so much potential, right? And so technology helps us to expose the students to that variety that we were talking about, to that diversity that we were talking about. And so I think that we will not do away with all the positives of technology, but we will now, it's going to be a new thing because we are going to still take advantage of being together in a classroom, interacting with each other face to face, you know, in that that proximity that the classroom provides, that, you know, a blank screen. And because, you know, teaching at the college level, my education students were all on Zoom. I could see all of their faces. We were chatting with each other. We were laughing together and the connection was there. I felt very close to my students because I was a foot away from them using the computer.
Right.
But for the majority of the language teachers that I know of, it's been this whole 16 months or whatever of blank screens of you know, of this, you know, and it's like, okay, all you see is, you can maybe hear me, you know, maybe you don't even hear me either, right? And so exactly, so it's like the sound is off, the video is off. And so, so that part of technology, exactly, that part of technology, we don't have to deal with, hopefully, with, right? But the other things, the good things about technology, I think we need to keep in order to provide more opportunities for the students, provide more options for the students. And so I think it's going to be this hybrid space in which we're going to be face-to-face doing certain things and then doing other things collectively and individually online. So that's how I'm seeing it. And then in terms of language use, I think that, you know, the more exposure they have, and then the more opportunities they have to engage with language. So we can use technology, for example, to create opportunities for students to engage across schools. We can do with somebody in a different country. We can bring guest speakers from other places. And so those are affordances that before I couldn't have a guest speaker from California in my, you know, in my seminar, but now I can, you know, and so those things we need to maintain and we need to take advantage of.
Man, I was just saying today too, I was saying the same thing about guest speakers, and I was saying the same thing about like, and I know Kelly Sita will agree, but like Go Formative, and Nelson as well, Go Formative giving you, I know it's my boyfriend and you can't have him. But like Go Formative giving you like a snapshot of what students did during class, like because before, what would you don't sit down till the end of the day, and then you have this like huge stack of papers. Even if you just took a stupid little like hey everybody, tear a little like page out of your, I don't care if they're this big, they're still this thick. Like by the time you get 1,000,005 of them, but at the end of the day, you're like, oh my God, I don't even want to look at these. And so, but like with different tools that we've had that have also amplified themselves out of necessity, in this experience, suddenly now it's like click, click, click. Okay, Allah, Diana, Janine, Nelson, Kelly, Tori. Okay, yes. Okay, I love what you did here. Let me maybe go back to the instructions because I feel like you could probably use some level ups. Send. Now I can send all 6 of them the same feedback, and then I can click on, Lucia, Madeline. Okay, let me give them some medium kind of feedback. Like all of a sudden now I can do things in mass that you can't do with a stack of papers. Like you can't write on multiple papers at the same time unless you have magic powers. I don't know. And so it's like all of a sudden now you have the ability to go boop, 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 check, 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 done. Like amazing the same day. I think you're exactly right. Like the input ability is incredible. Students go, oh, hey, like that audio didn't work. Oh, hold on. Boop, boop, boop. Click, 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 click. Done. Like now it's there. Can you hear it now? Oh yeah, now I can hear it. Whereas before, what you're in front of 36 kids going, hold on. Like all by yourself. Just 1 second. Pandemonium. The room is already on fire. Like it's over. It's over. And they're like, whoop, whoop, like partying. It's done. And now it's like, okay, hit refresh, click. I mean, we have so much literally at our fingertips now that how can that not affect our experience going forward in terms of our own target language use, but also our scaffolding for said language use and just anything we expose them to literally ever. Like, oh, you're interested in that? Here you go. Link. Here's some more stuff. Oh, you like that? Here, link. Here's some more stuff. What?
Well, that whole idea of personalized learning, right? In forever, it was like, it felt like such an enormous task. Like, how do I individualize? How do I prepare for every single individual in my class? And I think technology has allowed us to do a lot of that a lot better than we used to. Yeah. And so I don't think there's going back to the way we used to do things. I think, and it's, well, you and I were talking before everybody joined in, it was like, whatever, all the positive things that we are learning, including, oh, I gave a test earlier, the final for, whatever part of the final happened before because it happened online. Well, moving forward, why do we have to go back to what it used to be if now we realize it wasn't ideal and it wasn't working, right? And so I think it's important to remain positive and see all of the good things that can come out of this very stressful year that we've had. And I want to say thank you to all the teachers, because I know a lot of people are going to be leaving soon, but I want to thank everybody because I know it's been a very hard year for all of you, and you guys are just my new heroes and superheroes. Seriously, I mean, it's been tough for everybody, but for teachers to be there every day, dealing, engaging, doing their very best. I don't have enough words to thank you guys for all that you've done this year. And it's Teacher Appreciation Week. So thank you.
I mean, like Allah said, like, right? We're all doing fine, right? We haven't quit. If you've quit, it's fine. But if you haven't quit, yay, you haven't quit. I know. That's like what it feels like. I know, Diana, tú y yo también, like juntas. Like, oh my God, like we gotta do something. I was saying today to Joe, who I think has exited my view, but there he is. There, never mind. Joe, you're like number Joe, do you have a question? You're like number 8 out of too soon. You're like 7 out of 6. So you're like, whoop, like one window over. But I was just telling him, like, oh my gosh, the end of the year has snuck up on me, but also I can't, and I'm never a countdown person. Like I'm never like, oh, 15 days. this year, I'm like 74 hours. Like and that sounds terrible. And I'm not this person, but I'm like thinking to myself, when the roomies come in and the roomies don't do anything and they leave, I'm like, goodbye. Like, this is so uncomfortable, right? Clawing my way to Memorial Day. That's all I need to do. It's like so much. So yeah, Lou, I mean, as a person who was trained in so many ways by you, thank you. I mean, I think you've set us up I know you've set so many people up for success, and obviously target language use was kind of our topic tonight, but just really all of it ties into all of it. I know that sounds really silly, but when you're first starting out at whatever stage of life or whatever stage of training, like whatever, it's just so much of it's like pum, 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 like over your head. Like I remember being like, that makes a lot of sense. And then later, like, oh no, a kid's like throwing a desk going, F you, lady. And I'm like, but Piaget said some really important things. Like, but also crashing and swaying. Like, I was like, what do you do? Like, I don't understand.
Language kids.
I know. Hold on. I have a book. Goes and finds the book. Like all of those kind of things. It's really hard to negotiate all the things like specific to our content, also as professionals, and then professionally as you mature professionally around whoever you mature around professionally or not. Like it's all about like context and like all of those kind of things. So if you're not around people who nurture you in healthy ways, like you were saying, like with target language use and with being like, hey, it's fine, like you're doing okay, and like you said, if you really looked back at like video, which I did with myself in 2012, girl, it was ugly. It was like maybe 30%. And I was like, no, I am 90-10. Like, fake news. I was not. Yeah, it was like, I was sitting there with a stopwatch and I was like, this is the most depressing footage I've ever watched. And it was of myself. You can't be sober for that footage. Like I haven't worn khakis since then. Like, period, because the angle, not doing it. And it was just terrible. Like I was like stopping the timer every time I used English. It was 30% maximum, like on a good day. So I think what you're saying is really profound in terms of like being honest with yourself, being honest with like what language you actually value, maybe reconciling that and what that means in terms of the people around you and your students. If you're saying, stop it, Lou, that's not a word. And the kids are using like code switching that their parents use at home, like Jose Medina talked about on a previous session. Like now you're undervaluing language and you're teaching students that the language they use at home, isn't good enough and isn't like real, whatever that means. And so it's a lot to think about. I think target language use is a core practice that we see on the surface and we go, great, I'll speak a lot of French or like Arabic, 90%, no problem, whatever. Maybe, but like there's more to it than that. So I'm so thankful for your energy and for your time tonight. I don't know if you have any kind of concluding thoughts. Don't tell them any embarrassing stories from 2007.
I won't.
When I had more hair.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know everybody's tired. It's the end of the week. You can do this. Just keep strong. And if I can be of any help at any point in time, go party. If I can be of help at any point or time, Meredith, do you, I can type my email.
Can I put in your email? Is that okay?
Yes.
Which one do you prefer, UGA or Gmail?
I'll just do UGA and I'll send it in. I did already because that's my email and I don't read my Gmail as often because there are too many email.
Much. Yeah, absolutely.
Too much. I just can't read all of them. So this is the way. If you really want to get to me, do this. If you can wait a few days, then do the same, Tolosa Casadont @gmail. and then that one will be slower. Me llame, y me llame. Yes.
Darn that language use. Perfect. I just put both of them in there, and yeah, absolutely, because I think I know I've had, if anybody's interested, obviously we're in the after party now, sorry. But if anybody's interested, I've had different like reflections and videos and things on like target language use kind of over, I would say, the last several years. So I know we've got a lot of resources and also like places to start, especially if people have colleagues, you know, like, oh, I can't get, you know, so-and-so to use more than, you know, like just, it's just in an activity. And that was me for a long time, or not for a long time, for several years, like teaching about Spanish, not so much in Spanish. We were learning about a lot, but not really doing much. And so even getting over some of those humps, we've got plenty of, you know, plenty of resources and whatever you need. So I'll pop that email in there again as well. Let me make sure it's your UGA. Yep. And then I'll put mine in just in case, but all of it is available. We're easy to find. Lou, you're easy to find. I'm easy to find as well. Like, here we are. So thank you so much. And I don't think we have anybody. We only have a couple people from Georgia. So we've got totally other places. So thank you guys so much for everything. And Lou, obviously, you know, I think you're just the best. And I just think you're awesome. So whatever, you know, whatever you say goes. And you taught me so many things initially in my like training to be a teacher. Like that's such a formative time. And it's like in this weird way, half of it is going, yeah, and not really having any idea what any of it means. And then the other half is like, I take everything you say as gospel truth. Like there's like a weird half and half of like, no idea what you're saying, but I believe you on everything. And I know obviously we've, you know, come back in the same spaces in the last like 14 years. So I'm just always grateful for you. And I'm grateful that you're here in Georgia and that you shared your time with us tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you all. And if you need anything, reach out, please.
Absolutely.
It's great seeing everybody.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Allow the heart. The heart's my favorite reaction.
Yes, me too.
I'm putting, oops, I lost you. I'm putting mine up too. Boop. There we go. We're matching. Yes. Awesome.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I know. Hearts, just hearts. Like that's all we need. Oh, a few more weeks, everybody. Okay. Adios. Happy Friday Eve.
Guys. Yes.